Welcome to another episode of Submission Radio. It's November 2nd, and me and Cass are packing our bags and getting ready for UFC Sydney. But before we go up there, we have a big episode of Submission Radio for you.
We absolutely do. We're officially less than a week away from UFC Fight Night 55. And today, guys, we have a few big guests on the show. We've got none other than Nate the Great Marquardt. His fight recently got announced, and he's going to be chatting to us. We've got Ricardo Lamas just before his fight against Dennis Bermudez at UFC 180, UFC Mexico. And of course, we've got a guy that we have pretty regularly on the show, Alistair Overeem. He's going to be chatting to us about his fight against Stefan Struve, and that's coming up on UFC on Fox 13. And of course, we'll be doing the predictions for UFC Fight Night 55, Rockhold versus Bisping. There's a lot to get through today, isn't there, Dennis?
Yeah, it's a tight little show. Very excited to speak to Nate Marquardt, who's, guilty pleasure is delicious potato chips, I believe, Cass.
Ours too.
Ours as well. One of many things. Last time he was on the show, and this was before he fought James Te Huna and came off that win. A big favorite of mine, Nate, is, I've always been a big fan of his, and really great to see him back on the winning track. And I'm excited to have a chat with him, as well as all the other guys. Now, guys, if you still haven't, jump on Twitter and follow us at SubmissionAUS. We always have a whole bunch of content coming out, and with us flying over to Sydney in a few days, we're going to have all the exclusives, including exclusives on our YouTube channel. Now, these won't exactly be exclusives, but we will be talking to guys like Luke Rockhold, Michael Bisping, bringing you guys the press conference, the post-fight press conference, and then whatever happens in between. So if you guys still haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, jump on there. There's a lot of great content, isn't that right, guys?
Yeah, of course. And don't forget the weigh-ins and the Q&A. I believe the Q&A in Sydney will be Matt Brown, Alex Chambers, and Uriah Hall. So that's going to be a good one, and we will definitely have that up basically on the day. And at the moment, we've got a couple of things on the channel. We have an interview with Carl Noak, exclusive we did at the MMA Fight Store in Melbourne, Australia. That's a really fun one. We play a game with him called How Well Do You Know Your Teammates, where we basically do trivia about his other Jackson teammates. Suffice it to say, there's a question about Alistair Overeem streaking through the snow. So that's a bit of a fun one. Also, Carl Noak chooses his new look. We photoshopped a bunch of things on Carl's face, and he tells us which one he hates the least. And we also have another exclusive on the channel, which is basically an EA UFC simulation of the keys to victory for Luke Rockhold and Michael Bisping. So if you want a visual of how we think the fight will or may play out, definitely check that out. But I think without further ado, we're coming up on our first guest.
That's right, Cass. But before we do, we also have a going away party for Kid Dale coming to the channel soon. As people know, Kid Dale is an Australian grappling legend. He's moving over to America to really chase his dreams and really improve his skills, working with some of the best guys in the world. So we have an interview with him and throw him a little bit of a party. It's hard to explain it over the show, but when it pops up on the channel, you guys will love it. It's going to be a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun with him. It's coming from more of a comedy angle. Kit's a great guy, and he does a lot of production. He wants to be an actor. He's following his acting roots as well, flying overseas to really give that a go as well. So we put him through his paces, and we put through a really fun interview. Talk a little bit about Metamoris, but really talk about where he's going next. That's going to be on the channel soon, and there's some photos up on our Twitter, a couple of photos from that interview where we have a few props. So all I can say to you guys is when that comes out, keep an eye on the social media. When it comes out, you guys are going to have a big laugh. Me, Cass, and Kit really get together and really have a bit of fun for you guys and throw a nice little going away party. And, there's a whole bunch of little tips and tricks and things happening throughout there. So I think you guys really enjoyed. But Cass, I think you're right. It's time to jump to the first guest, and can't wait to have this guest on the show. Very lucky to have him with his fight being so close at UFC Mexico.
All right, guys. Our next guest is UFC fighter and one of the best featherweights in the world. He takes on Dennis Bermudez at UFC 180 in just over a week. Guys, we have none other than Ricardo Lamas. Ricardo, welcome to Submission Radio.
No problem, guys. Thanks a lot for having me on the show.
Oh, it's absolutely our pleasure, especially the fact that you've taken the time so close to your fight. You're deep in training camp. Tell us, you're obviously fighting Dennis Bermudez. How is training camp going, and how's all the preparation going?
It's going great. I'm coming into my last week of hard training. So I'm down in Miami right now, which is I kind of split my camps up, and I do half in Chicago and half in Miami. So I'm finishing up here. I'm going to go back to Chicago next Friday for one day, and then the following day I leave for Mexico. So I'll be in Mexico next weekend.
Now, you mentioned that you're wrapping up your training. Tell us, how has training been? Obviously, Dennis is riding an amazing win streak going into your fight with him. What do you think are going to be some of the biggest challenges that you have to prepare yourself facing a fighter like Dennis Bermudez?
I think the biggest challenge is just going to be facing a young, hungry fighter. He's on his way up. He's riding a big win streak, like you said, and he really has that taste to get a title shot. So pretty much he's got to go through me to get it. But I'm still hungry. Also, I want to get back to that title, and I'm ready. I've been training my butt off this whole time, and camp's been going great. I haven't had any injuries, which is kind of a rarity in our sport. Because how hard we train. Sometimes we come across little injuries here and there, but I'm good. I'm feeling great, and I think that's bad news for Dennis.
And the other thing is, you face a lot of the top guys in the division. Obviously, you've already faced Jose Aldo, the current champion. Do you think that gives you a little bit of an advantage coming in against Dennis, your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I've faced some of the toughest guys in the division already. I beat Cub Swanson. He's ranked number 2 right now in the division. I've went up against Jose Aldo, and I won all 5 rounds with them. And, I feel like there isn't anything that Dennis is going to bring that I haven't seen yet or that I haven't competed against yet. I feel like I've competed against better strikers. I feel like I've competed against better grapplers. So for me, this is, just another opportunity to show my skills and show the world that, I'm deserving of another title shot.
Now this is going to be the first UFC card in Mexico, and I mean that's a pretty special thing all on its own. Going into this fight and preparing for this fight with Dennis, is there an added element, of excitement knowing that you'll be, on the first card in Mexico?
Yeah, definitely. Since I found out that the UFC was going to Mexico, I was on the phone bugging them, daily to put me on the card. So when they decided to throw me on there, I was really excited. I'm half Mexican myself. My mother was born in Mexico, so I feel like I'm going to have a real good fan base behind me, and it's going to be great, man. I've been waiting for this for a long time.
It's no secret that the UFC has been trying to get into that Latino and Mexican market for quite some time now. How important do you think that is, acquiring that Latino market for the sport of MMA?
It's huge. Latin people, especially, in Mexico, they're huge fight fans. There are tons of legendary boxers that come from Mexico, some of the best boxers in the world. So, MMA is kind of like an extension of boxing where you get a lot more in it. We have boxing, but we also have, kicks, knees, elbows, wrestling. It's just, an action-packed fight. And the people love to see that. And this is going to be a huge event. We went down there for kind of like a presser a few months ago, and we had a great response from the people, and everybody's excited for this event. It sold out in 8 hours. That says it all right there.
Wow.
Now, there's been a few injuries plaguing the card. Unfortunately, Cain Velasquez and Diego Sanchez had to pull out of their fights. You'll be one of the guys really representing, like you mentioned, the people down there. How does it feel knowing that you will be one of the primary guys on the card that people will be supporting? You mentioned you're excited about having support there, but now you'll be one of the primary guys on the card getting that support.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. When I got on this card, the one thing that I really wanted to do was give the people a great show, and give them what they want to see. So I'm going in there and I'm going to be swinging for the fences, and I'm looking for a knockout because that's what everybody wants to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think it's a little bit tough, like the UFC's got their work cut out for them, obviously, because Cain Velasquez and Diego Sanchez, 2 very sort of Mexican icons, are off that card?
I think that it is disappointing that those 2 guys got injured, but I think the excitement about this event is so high that people are still wanting to see it, and they're still going to go, and it's still going to be a sold-out show, and it's still going to be a great event. And hopefully we can head back down there again with Cain headlining, and hopefully Diego gets a chance to fight in Mexico as well.
Now, your division, the featherweight division, it's been one of the primary divisions that's been talked about, this year. I think this is a lot of people love talking about some of the great fighters in your division, such as yourself, Frankie Edgar, Cub Swanson. One of the people in the division that's been getting a lot of attention is Conor McGregor. he's been campaigning for a title shot for quite some time now. And, he's fighting Dennis Siver, but a lot of people believe that after that, he may get the title shot. However, you're fighting Dennis Bermudez, who's coming off an amazing win streak. I'm just wondering, if you do go through Dennis and beat him, are you going to be expecting a title shot afterwards? Obviously, you're being a really tough guy.
I would jump on it in a second. I don't think it's realistic, and I think there are other guys that have been ahead of me in line. Honestly, I think Cub is probably the most deserving of the next title shot. He's put together a great win streak. He's finished a lot of fights, and if he gets through Frankie, I think he should be next in line. But I mean, with a win over Dennis Bermudez, I think this puts me right back in the talk, and maybe one or two more fights after that, and I'm definitely deserving of another title shot.
Absolutely. And if, for example, Conor McGregor, if they decide to say slot him in there against Jose Aldo, what would your thoughts be on that? I know a lot of featherweights kind of have mixed feelings about that.
Yeah, he's a big talker. I don't really like his personality. I don't know the guy from nothing though, so I just don't like the way he carries himself. And really, I think he'd need to fight, me, Chad, Frankie, or Cub before he should get to a title shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And, from looking at Conor as a fighter, were you impressed with his last performance against Dustin?
Yeah, I was. The thing about Conor, the thing that I respect about him is it takes a lot of balls to get up and say the things that he says, and he backs them up. So even though I don't like his personality, I can respect that. And I was impressed. Dustin is a tough guy. But I still think that the UFC is kind of catering to his style and giving him fighters that match up well with his style. We haven't seen him against a tough, hard-nosed wrestler yet, which I think will give him a lot of problems.
Yeah. Now, the sport seems like obviously people are rewarded for, to those who trash talk and make big statements and garner public interest and things like that. Hey, assuming all goes to plan, you beat Dennis Bermudez, will we see you get on the mic and call somebody out after the fight?
Definitely. Right now I'm 100% focused on Dennis Bermudez, but, after November 15th, I'll definitely be calling some people out.
Now, your last fight for the title against Jose Aldo didn't quite go your way. It was a great fight, however. What do you think are some of the biggest things that you learned from that experience? And, obviously you mentioned the title's still in your mind. You still want to go for it, and you're not that far away. What would you do differently if you had a rematch with him?
The biggest thing I took away from that fight was just being too tentative and not pulling the trigger. And, against a guy like Jose Aldo, you're not going to beat him like that. You have to fight the way that Chad Mendes fought him in the last fight and be in his face constantly and moving all the time. And I was kind of sitting back and waiting on him. I thought he was going to be a little more aggressive. And when he wasn't, it kind of threw me off my game a little bit. And, I kind of got lured into his game of standing and striking with him when I should have been, really focusing on my style of fighting and being in his face and mixing up my strikes with my takedowns and looking for my takedowns and really just trying to tire him out.
You mentioned his performance last weekend against Chad Mendes. You watched the fight. What did you think of his performance?
I thought it was a great fight. I thought it was a great performance by both guys. Both guys showed a ton of heart. They were both they were both rocking each other left and right and dropping each other, and they kept fighting through it. And, those are the type of fights that everybody wants to see. Those are the type of fights that everybody loves. So I'm no different. I thought that fight was awesome.
And speaking of fights people want to see, in late 2012, there was some brief talk about a possible fight between you and Frankie Edgar. Obviously, Frankie's in a fight right now and you're fighting Dennis. But, potentially in the future, given the two of you are at the top of the division, is that a fight that you're still interested in?
Of course, yeah. Frankie is, he's one of he's a future legend in the sport. He's a former world champion, and I'm here to fight the best. So, that would be an awesome fight to have.
Now, Ricardo, we do something that we call the Submission Radio Tap-Out Round with all our guests. We basically throw a bunch of fun questions at you, get to know you a little bit more, and you want to answer with the first thing that comes to your mind, kind of like word association. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Who's your favorite fighter to watch?
Favorite fighter to watch? Vitor Belfort.
NBA, NFL, or soccer?
NFL.
Finish this sentence, Ricardo. People don't know that I...
Kick ass.
We know that.
People don't know that about us, Ricardo. They know that about you now. Next question: DC or Marvel?
Oh, DC or Marvel? Marvel.
Okay, what's your go-to movie after a long day of training?
Step Brothers.
Yes.
Whose ass do you kick on EA UFC, and who do you play as when you kick that ass?
I haven't even played it yet because I don't have the new Xbox.
Oh my God, it's a travesty. This is a travesty.
I gotta get the new. Yeah, I gotta get the new system. I have the game, and it's just sitting there. I need the system.
No.
You've got
UFC
the game.
hooked me up.
Oh man, you got the game, you got nothing to play. Well, when John Hackman was on our show, he was talking about Dennis Bermudez playing with Steven Seiler right after their weigh-ins. So, regardless of the fight, you can play some Xbox and PlayStation with Dennis afterwards. Now, next question: what's the best question? Next question: what's the best way to beat the Bermudez Triangle?
The Bermudez Triangle?
Yeah.
Punch him in the face.
What's your go-to move in grappling when you're rolling?
Guillotine.
Best advice ever given to you by a coach?
To take things step by step. Don't think ahead and to go one match at a time.
I'm going to take that advice going into the next question. Finish this sentence for us. People don't know that
People don't know that I can do a mean Robert De Niro impression.
Oh, well, here we go. Here we go. Now, Ricardo,
it's a facial one. It's a facial one, though. It's not like the voice.
Come. Can we at least get a little taste? Just a little taste. Just 5 seconds. Give us one line.
I mean, it's hard to do a taste, but with my mohawk, I look a lot like Robert De Niro, Taxi Driver. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well,
so, I put I got the nose and everything. I put the face on, and I do. You talking to me? You talking to me, huh?
Well, maybe in the next UFC countdown we can see a little taste of that.
Yeah, definitely.
You should definitely do that in the weigh-ins when you and Dennis weigh in. I feel like you should come out dressed as Robert De Niro and Taxi Driver. This is it, man. We found it.
Mug him Robert De Niro style.
That would go viral so fast. Well, the last question, Ricardo. How do you plan on beating Dennis at UFC 180?
Knockout.
Absolutely. Guys, you can follow Ricardo Lamas on Twitter at Ricardo Lamas MMA. And, of course, catch him at UFC 180. It's November 15th against Dennis Bermudez. We're all very excited here in Australia. Ricardo, thank you so much for being on the show.
No problem. Thank you, guys.
This is Don Fry, and you're listening to Submission Radio. You touch that dial and I'll kill you.
Our next guest made a statement when he beat James Te Huna at UFC New Zealand and made his return to the middleweight division. He'll be facing Brad Tavares at UFC 182 January 3rd. We have none other than Nate, the great Marquardt, on the program, and he returns. This is his second appearance. Nate, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Nate, it's an absolute pleasure having a veteran like yourself on the show. When we spoke to you last, you mentioned that you were moving back to 185 because you believed that you would be more explosive and physically stronger. You know, you had that big win against James Te Huna in his own backyard. Tell us about how you felt that night, and did you feel like the old Nate who pioneered the UFC's middleweight division a few years ago?
Well, I don't know about that. I definitely felt I felt good, and I felt like it was where I was supposed to be fighting. You know, I felt healthy was the main thing. You know, I was completely hydrated and wasn't cutting weight all week and stuff like that. So I think it made a big difference.
You know, Nate, you just said something really interesting. You said, you know, you don't know if you really feel like you felt back in, you know, back in your first run in the UFC middleweight division. I'm just wondering, how does the body feel? How do you feel at this stage in your career? Are there any issues that you have to deal with? What do you feel like compared to your first run in the middleweight division in the UFC?
Oh yeah, I guess. Well, I didn't really mean it that way. I meant like I feel like a different fighter now. So I'm not necessarily trying to be the old Nate. You know, I'm trying to be new Nate, I guess, is more what I meant. And actually, you know, I feel very good, very healthy. I feel like a lot of, you know, a big portion of my career I fought with some of the wrong training ethics. You know, I just trained too hard, too long. I was too hard on my body, and you know, I was eating the wrong foods, and now that all that's cleaned up, you know, and I'm more confident to take time off and things like that when I need. I'm just healthier, and so for sure I'm not, you know, when I do get injured, I'm not necessarily going to heal as fast, but also I get injured way less because I'm not overtraining. So I really feel blessed in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely, Nate. You know, most of the guys that we get on, everyone's always talking about training smarter as opposed to training harder. But I wanted to ask you, you know, it's a funny thing moving up and down between weight classes, and just in terms of, you know, how you would have expected to feel in terms of power or explosiveness. The fight against Te Huna was a pretty short one, so we didn't get to see all that much. How did you feel? Did you feel strong? Did you feel like you got that explosiveness and that physical strength back that you may not have had at welterweight?
Well, yeah, I guess in that respect, yeah, I feel the same. I feel like, you know, I guess when I was cutting weight, it was hard to recover from my workouts. So gradually, over time, each workout, you know, I was able to put less and less, you know, explosion, I guess, into the workouts. And now, being healthy and being able to eat, I'm able to, you know, get back to where I should be as far as, you know, explosiveness and work rate and things like that.
Now, Nate, the UFC made a very big deal to promote their first card in New Zealand, and New Zealand obviously are our neighbours. You ended up beating the hometown hero. What was that like, and did you get any funny looks around the streets of Auckland after the fight?
Oh, no, not at all. You know, the people were very respectful. Even before the fight, they were great, and then after the fight, you know, I feel like they might have been kind of shocked at first, but they definitely were nice to me, and you know, I feel like I gained a lot of fans that night.
Wow. Well, we actually went to New Zealand soon after the UFC event, and it was pretty amazing, suffice it to say. Did you get much of a chance to enjoy New Zealand after the fight?
Oh yeah, we stayed for another 4 or 5 days, I believe. We drove around and stuff. It was awesome.
You got to climb some mountains with that cool beard that you have and fit in with the mountain people. It was
yeah, exactly.
It was awesome. Every time I go to New Zealand, I make sure I grow out a beard. I was going to say, you know, it was a pretty quick fight with Te Huna. I was wondering, what was your game plan going into that one? And did it play out the way that you saw the fight playing out?
Well, game plan, I don't know. You know, we had a few like technical things that we were looking at, and other than that, I mean, we didn't necessarily have a game plan per se, but you know, the two takedowns ended up being basically reversals to his takedown attempts. So that was the one thing that was kind of would be unexpected. I didn't think he would be trying to take me down, but you know, that's just how it went. So.
Well, you're coming back now, obviously, to fight Brad Tavares at UFC 182. You know, much like yourself, Brad's a guy who's very well-rounded and he's got knockout power. How are you approaching this fight, and what do you see as Brad's strengths and weaknesses? Yeah,
he's a very tough fighter. He looks strong, and he looks like he's tough. Like he, you know, he can take a punch, and he can recover from bad positions. He's very good striker. He's got good combinations, good kicks, good punches, good knees, and you know, he gets up well off the ground. Even the fight against when he fought Yoel Romero, he was able to get up off the ground every single time. He was never held for very long, really. So I was really surprised at that. And so, you know, I think he's just like any other UFC fighter. He's very tough and well-rounded.
Yeah, that's right. There's no easy fights in the UFC now. You know, without giving away a game plan, and you know, when you think about this fight in your head, this upcoming fight, where do you think the majority of this fight will take place? Does it seem like it will be good to keep it standing, or do you feel like it will be more of a ground affair?
I kind of look at this fight real similar to my last fight as far as game plan, because I feel like it's something that if I come in with a super set game plan, it might steer me in the wrong direction. But we're going to look at some technical aspects of the fight, and then there's going to be opportunities for specific things. But other than that, I'm not going to try to dictate one specific game plan or another.
Now, UFC 182, it's also a very stacked card. You've got 2 title fights. You've got Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier and Ronda Rousey versus Kat Zingano. It's going to be a great event. How happy are you that you'll be on such a big stage with so much exposure, as opposed to, possibly one of the smaller cards like on a Fight Pass or something like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's great. Well, actually, trying to think, I thought I heard news that maybe the Zingano fight got moved to a different date.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, they did move it to a different day, but you still have Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier, which is one of the most looked forward fights, in the history of the UFC. Yeah,
and I'm sure they'll add other fights, big name fights as well. I think it's going to be a huge card, and they generally try to do a big card around the New Year's in Vegas that weekend. So it's awesome. I'm very blessed. Like, my last fight was a main event fight on the first card in New Zealand. That was amazing. And then again here I'm put on like a huge card. It's just I feel like it's all God's blessing.
Oh, absolutely. And, in terms of training camp, we were just talking about your training camps. It's still very, very early, but do you know where you'll be doing primarily all of your training for this upcoming fight?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'll be doing it in Denver here. I don't necessarily have any trips planned, and I think if I need anything extra, I'll probably fly in 1 or 2 guys, but yes, I'm getting great training here in Denver. I have Elevation Fight Team, Factory X, Easton Training Center, and my strength coach Lauren Lando, and just we have a bunch of good guys here and guys that come here from out of town as well. So.
Awesome. Now, Nate, Brad was knocked out. I'm not sure if you caught, I'm assuming you would have caught his last fight against Tim Boetsch, but Brad was knocked out in his last fight. It was rather surprisingly given how dominant he was in that fight. As someone who's also had knockout losses in his career, can you tell us a little bit about the mindset and what is it like mentally for a guy coming off a knockout, and how does it affect you when you go into your next fight?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd never really been knocked out before I fought Ellenberger, and so I just kind of assumed it was like one of those things, like I got caught or whatever. And then obviously when it happened second time in a row with Hector, I started to look at stuff a little differently, like maybe something's wrong here, because why did it happen again? And again, it was like, it was one of those things where like I can take big shots in sparring against heavier guys that are heavier than me and just as fast or strong as those guys, and be okay. And then suddenly in the fight I was getting knocked out, and so obviously for me that was the key for me to look at. It's possibly that cutting the weight and the dehydration and your brain being dehydrated, and the fluid around your brain that protects your brain, was some of that was missing or whatever is off. And then, watching Brad, I've also seen Tim Boetsch do that to a few guys. So I'm sure that guy hits really hard. And it's one of those things. He's kind of awkward but at the same time he hits really hard. So a lot of times when you see the punch coming, even if it's a really hard punch, and it's a natural movement, like you can kind of absorb it. But when it comes at a weird angle at a weird time, and you're totally not ready for it, and it's a really hard punch, like, I'm sure it affects you. So, but mentally, for him, if he's smart, he's just kind of forgetting about it and saying, well, that was just a fluke and whatever. But you never know; he could be questioning himself or whatever. But that's kind of the nature of the game is you have to look at those kind of things and question sometimes, and sometimes you just have to write them off as flukes.
Sure.
Now, Nate, it's funny to say, and it's funny when guys hear this, but you are pretty much a veteran in MMA. It's not because you're old or anything like that, but because you've accomplished so much in the sport. You've had such a tremendous career thus far. And at 35, are you still solely focused on winning the title, or is it just taking fight by fight at this stage now that you've returned back into the middleweight division?
Well, I'm glad you clarified that I'm not old, because you were saying that. No, I guess I used to focus so much on that, and it can be a detriment because you can kind of look past things and not look at the big picture. But right now, I'm looking at the big picture, and really the big picture is just what's in front of me, and that's it. So. Brad Tavares is my next fight, and that's all I really have to worry about. And is that one of my goals or my desires to win the title? Yeah, of course. That's still my goal. But at the same time, looking at my career and being like, oh, I have to get the title in the next 5 years, or whatever. I'm just taking it fight by fight, and everything's going to happen in God's time, and so I'm not worried about how much time it's going to take, or who I'm fighting next, or things like that. Like I'm just going to take one fight at a time.
And I just, you seem very wise, Nate. You seem like, you've had a while to sort of like learn these things and have all these lessons. Do you think sometimes guys put maybe a little bit too much pressure on themselves? Like they think, look, my goal is to win the title in X amount of years, and then maybe sometimes they overlook their opponents a bit?
Yeah, I definitely, I know guys do that. And then also I think sometimes that there's pressure, like, 'cause I remember when I first started fighting in the UFC, like the first couple of years, I had an interview where someone asked me like what my 5-year plan was, and I was like, I think I made something up, because I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about, because like how can I plan 5 years ahead? I can barely plan a week ahead,
Yeah.
So like you can't look at the sport that way. You have to take it one fight at a time and one day at a time, even, because you never know when you're getting injured or fights are falling through, opponents are changing, whatever it is.
Now, Nate, we spoke about your return to the middleweight division in your first interview with us before, and obviously you were going in, returning into the middleweight division after being gone for a while. I'm just wondering, you touched on the fact that people really enjoyed having you in New Zealand, but deep down inside, after you got that win and you realized, you're back in the win column and everything's worked out, and it was a great move to go back to the middleweight division. What sort of went through your mind? How did you feel afterwards, after getting that win?
I was very happy, and I was very just grateful, I guess, is more that's a better expression of how I felt. I was just felt very grateful. Just every blessing I have, all my teammates and my coaches, my family, my wife, and just everything, my health. And if you look at all the injuries that happen and all of the crisis that people go through, I'm just very blessed.
Absolutely. Now, Nate, we let the fans know that you were coming on the show, and we had a few fans send in some questions. So we'll ask you some of those. Let's have a look.
Okay.
Jimbo Jones on Twitter at JimBob986. He wants to know: have you ever? And this is hard to believe, but have you ever been intimidated by an opponent?
Have I ever been intimidated? I would say I would say not intimidated. You know, one time when I fought Anderson Silva, it was the first time I'd ever encountered this, I would say, I guess, where like we'd seen each other all week or whatever, and you know, we were just to each other. Then it was at the weigh-ins, and then it's all of a sudden it's time for us to square up, or, you know, to go face to face. And suddenly, like, he put his head like real aggressively right on my head, and I remember, like, it threw me off because I'd never encountered that. I wasn't expecting it, and you know, like I could feel an adrenaline rush. I was like angry, and so it definitely got in my head, you know, and where I should have just said, yeah, whatever, like, we're fighting tomorrow. There's no reason to get all pumped up right now. But so yeah, I wouldn't say I've ever been intimidated necessarily. Now probably in training, that's probably a different story because you know, especially earlier in my career, because a lot of times you're training with guys that are much better than you at something. So I remember the first time boxing with a world champion, and, you know, I hadn't really done any boxing before. I've just done like kickboxing, sparring and stuff. And
wow.
All of a sudden I'm there with a world champion boxer, and that's a little intimidating. But
yeah.
Now, we've got another question here, and I'm gonna not say this name very well, so I apologize to this person. I'm just not great at reading out names. This name is Mistakevo at Mistakevo on Twitter. He'd like to know: are you still training at TriStar? Do you still train with TriStar, Nate?
Oh, actually, I haven't been there in. I'm trying to think. It had to be a little over a year and a half ago was the last time I've been there. And I've seen George there. I've seen George, and I've also seen Faraz since then. And but I haven't trained with those guys for like over a year and a half. So yeah, I mean, it was great, and I've really I learned a lot from those guys, from George and Faraz mainly, and then you know, some of the wrestlers up there, really good wrestlers, and so it's definitely changed, you know, my style and my career for the better. So, but at this point, it's I'm getting really good training here in Denver, and it's, you know, it's not easy for me to travel all the way up there. And then, you know, I have little kids and a wife and stuff, and so it's hard in that respect. It's hard financially, and just, you know, not having your own food and your own place and stuff. So I feel like I get a better camp when I'm here in Denver. And that being said, that's not to say I would never go up there again. So I definitely, you know, those guys are still my friends, and I consider them team. So if and when I get the opportunity, I'll definitely go up there.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned Anderson Silva before. The Gambler 33 has a question. One of your classic matchups in the UFC was obviously Anderson. You know, he's come back to fight Nick Diaz. Would you ever want a rematch with Anderson if the opportunity presented itself? And just a couple of things. What did you learn from your first fight with him, Nate?
Oh yeah, I learned a lot. You know, the thing I told you about already, and then I learned a couple of things. So, like, you know, I lost my composure a little bit when the ref stood us up, and I was kind of upset about that. So instead of going back to my game plan, I was kind of flustered. So that threw me off. So probably a lot of mental mistakes that I made in that fight, as well as a couple technical. And so, and then what was the other? Oh, a rematch or whatever. Yeah, I mean, you know, he's a legend. He's always going to be a big name. So for sure, you know, if it makes sense, I would fight whoever the UFC wants. So.
Now, at Mark Shakati, he'd like to know, would pancreas in North America be great for MMA, pro wrestling, and hybrid wrestling infrastructure?
So wait, he's asking if pancreas...
Yeah, in North America would be great. If you think it would be great for North America to basically, I suppose, have pancreas events.
Oh, okay. I think he's talking about like the old pancreas rules where you had the palm strike and then you could punch the body and kick and stuff. Yeah, you know, I think I don't think it would take on too well now that MMA is so widely accepted. But one thing I do think, kind of along that line, is that I think they should have amateur fights with a little bit different rules than professional fights. Like right now, the amateurs can, punch and knee and elbow and stuff like that, and they have shorter rounds, which isn't necessarily better at all. It's kind of, in a way, it's kind of worse. It can, it can make the fights a little more dangerous. But I think the amateur rules, or they could have a set of them anyway, where they have no punching on the ground, or no punching the head, or no head strikes on the ground. So maybe you could punch the body or something, or just grappling on the ground. But you could punch and kick and stuff on the feet, just to make it safer for amateurs, because right now the only way to kind of get ready for that would be to take a kickboxing match. But then there's no way out other than, getting beat up and knocked out. At least with those rules, if you're losing on the feet, you could do a takedown and then the punches would stop. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I don't know if that's kind of what he meant, but.
One thing you said that was interesting, Nate, you said that you thought that, in amateur MMA, if the rounds are shorter, that might make it more dangerous. What exactly do you mean by that? Well,
so if you have a 5-minute round, the guys are going to pace themselves for a 5-minute round, and so they're not going to be able to go as hard. They're not going to necessarily throw their strikes at 100%. They might throw them at 90%, which is kind of what you want to do anyway. But because of the short rounds, it allows them to, just go out there and swing wild and whatever for 3 minutes and then go recover and do it again. I don't know. It just seems, to me, it seems more dangerous. Maybe there's scientific data that says otherwise, but it seems more dangerous. Like there's more chance of injury on the fighters when it's a shorter round.
I mean, in terms of scientific data, you're a guy who's had a lot of fights in his career, so we'll certainly take your word for it, as opposed to a guy in a lab. But Nate, we do what we call on a submission radio, the submission radio tap out round. Basically, towards every interview, we ask our guests a bunch of fun questions and basically rattle them off, and you say the first thing that pops into your mind, kind of like word association. Are you ready?
Oh yeah, I'm horrible at this. Go ahead.
Everyone says that, and then they pass with flying colors. Don't worry, we'll be here for you.
Yeah, well, you can't. There's no fail unless you just can't think of anything.
That's
oh, there's a fail, Nate. There's a fail. No. Come in this mentally.
Oh, they are.
No.
Okay, so Nate, after so many years in MMA, what still motivates you to get up in the morning and train as hard as you do?
Love, because I love the sport and I love all the people in it.
Best song that came on at your sister's wedding?
Oh man, my sister just got married and I can't remember any of the names of the songs.
Must have been a wild night then.
Oh yeah. No, I'm just not good with song names.
What's your favorite pre-UFC fight that you've ever had?
Oh, that I had or that I've watched?
Oh no, that you've had before coming to the UFC.
Oh, that I've had. Probably. Actually, it would be my fourth time fighting a guy named Kunioku Kiyuma, and we went one win, one loss, one draw, and then the fourth time we fought, I knocked him out. So it was kind of and it was a 3-round fight. It was awesome.
What's the best piece of advice ever given to you by a coach?
To have fun.
Now, Nate, you've got some young kids. Will you ever sit down with them when they're old enough and show them some of your greatest highlights?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What's the strangest fake rumor that you've ever heard about yourself?
Fake rumor? I'm trying to think. I can't think of any rumors per se. I remember one of the funniest things I heard was Phil Bruni called me Hot Dog Marquardt, and I that was pretty funny.
Hot Dog Marquardt.
Hot dog, yeah.
If you could send one message back to yourself 20 years ago, what would it be?
It would be. Oh, that's a good one. I guess it would be to just have fun. Like I said, the coaching advice, just have fun, not necessarily take it so seriously.
Mm-mm.
And you thought the question about the 5-year plan in that previous interview was difficult. Now, Nate, you haven't fought in Las Vegas since 2010. Are you excited to fight there again at UFC 182?
Yeah, for sure. It's close to home, so it's a short flight, and I kind of know the routine there, where how to get food and how to avoid traffic and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it'll be fun.
Very nice. Now, Nate, name a piece of clothing that you would absolutely never, ever wear.
Never wear? I guess a dress.
All right, good answer.
Yeah.
And finally, Nate, how are you planning on finishing Brad Tavares at UFC 182?
Oh, shoot. I guess whatever opportunity that presents itself first.
Well, it's going to be an awesome battle, guys. You can follow Nate Marquardt on Twitter at Nathan Marquardt, and you can check him out at UFC 182 on January 3rd in the US, or, of course, in Australia, where the time difference is going to be January the 4th. Nate, it's been an absolute pleasure having you back on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Hey, everybody. This is Frank Shamrock, UFC legend, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Our next guest is fighting Stefan Struve at UFC on Fox 13, December 13th. He's one of the most accomplished heavyweights in MMA. Ladies and gentlemen, Alistair Overeem is on Submission Radio. Alistair, welcome back to Submission Radio.
How's it going? And thanks for having me.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, Alistair. Now, last time you were on the show, you were on your way to a theme park. The burning question is, how's your day at the theme park? What rides did you go on? And was Alistair Overeem scared at any point of the roller coasters?
Yeah, that theme park probably was, I don't remember the name, but it was one small theme park here in Albuquerque, and it totally sucked.
That's a shame. Well, other than riding roller coasters, what else have you been up to?
Well, actually just training and, all the things that surround the sporting career. I just had my daughter in Miami, so I spent some time with her for her birthday. And other than that, just training for this fight. I mean, it's very important. The fight coming up December 13th against my fellow countryman, Stefan Struve. Yeah, I take every fight serious, but this is going to be another big one. So I've just been dedicated, just been going to the gym, eating healthy, making sure that I have everything in order behind the scenes, which is sparring partners, coaches. I'm actually also preparing to come to Australia to do some appearances there early next year when the weather still is good. So, just been busy. A lot of activities behind the scenes.
Well, Alistair, we're a little bit disappointed because I think originally you were going to come down for Stereo Sonic, which is a huge festival here in Australia, full of great music. Unfortunately, there's a great fight popped up, so you are getting back into training camp and unable to come down. I was just wondering, it is a little bit, it's not a quick turnaround, but you were in the fighting only a few months ago. What went behind your decision to fight Stefan in December? Was it the fact that he seemed like a great opponent? Was it the card that really drew you towards fighting him?
No, UFC decides the opponent, so they decide the opponent, and can you fight then and then against this guy? Yeah, sure I can. For me, I rather prefer to fight soon because I'm still in the rhythm of things. And in the last fight I didn't have any damage. I was on Dr. It was like, even though I did lose, and I still believe, and 9 out of 10 times I beat Ben Rothwell. But even though I did lost the fight, I didn't have any damage. So what is the reason to not fight?
Well, in regards to your loss against Ben Rothwell, you trained obviously at Greg Jackson's and Mike Winklejohn's. A lot of people were excited to see new Alistair. Unfortunately, because the fight ended so quickly, we didn't see, possibly a lot of those new tools. I was wondering, what was the game plan going to the fight? And would you be possibly interested in a rematch with Ben Rothwell?
Yeah, I don't really discuss game plans, but looking what considering what I'm doing with my sparring partners, I know how dominant I am. I know what I'm doing to them. I know my cardio was excellent. I was in one of the best shapes ever. And that being said, I would love a rematch with Ben. I still believe 9 out of 10 times I beat him easy. No sweat. But, getting caught is part of the game. It's the X factor that exists. I've been fortunate to never really been caught before like this. I've had like 75 fights by now. So, considering that, bad luck happened, in the sport you need a bit of luck on your side. And Ben had it in our last fight. Luck was on his side.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of the fight, early on, one of your kicks damaged Ben's arm. How badly did you think Ben's arm was hurt when you saw that kick land?
Well, it was. I thought it was hurt enough that he wasn't punch with it, and probably if the fight would have continued a couple more minutes, or even in the break, pain would have set in, and it would definitely have its effect on it.
Now, you talked a lot about how great the training was at Jackson's, Winklejohn's, and, the support network. Those guys are real geniuses down there, and they seem like they'd be good for mental support as well. What sort of advice did you get from Coach Wink and Coach Jackson afterwards, or right after the fight?
Not really that much advice. It was just like, take it easy, let's watch some tape, and then we'll slowly start building it. Everybody was in an agreement that stuff like this happens. It happens. It's the same as, Bigfoot against Kane, gets caught, it's over. It's both the beauty and the nice and the bad side about the sport. Sometimes it happens.
And, recently, speaking of Jackson's, one of your past opponents and training partners, Travis Brown, left Jackson's to go to the Glendale Fighting Club. I was just wondering, what did you think when you heard that Travis left? And who are your primary training partners going to the fight with Stefan Struve? We'd imagine you need some tall training partners as well to mimic his style.
Well, first and foremost, of course, light heavyweight champion Jon Jones. Great guy and great sparring partner. And then we have Cody East, he just turned legacy heavyweight champion. And we're going to bring in some tall guys, for this camp. So, I've got good sparring partners. I'm totally not worried about that. And what Travis is concerned, he's a tall guy too. And I actually was looking forward to training with him, but apparently he chose to do his training elsewhere. That's up to him. I mean, it's a free country, it's a free world. So he needs to go where he feels at his best.
Fair enough. We spoke to Kyle Noak recently, who said, everything's fine between him and Travis, even though he's left. I just wanted to confirm everything's cool with you and Travis, even though he's training in Glendale Fight Club?
Yeah, sure.
This is going to be your second training camp going into a fight with Jackson's, Winklejohn's. I was just wondering, obviously, the first time around, you were just, getting used to working with everybody, getting used to the coaches. What's it like, you just got to Albuquerque, a few days ago. What's the vibe like now going into the Stefan Struve fight in the training camp?
The vibe is good. Just back to work. I just got there a couple of days ago, so... there's not really that much to talk about. I mean, it's back to work, back to training. Vibes are excellent. It's all positive. It's all beyond positive. I did the first part of my camp in Miami at MMA Masters. Had a great connection there as well. And we're going to finish up the camp here. And from here, we're going to go to Phoenix, which is like 30 minutes plane. So everything's positive.
Awesome. Now, Alistair, you mentioned that this fight against Stefan Struve, it's another big one. I just wanted to get your opinion. What makes this another big fight, and what are some of the strengths that you see in Stefan Struve that you'll have to look out for?
Well, he's a tall guy. He's definitely going to be using his reach. He's got his submission game. overall, I think I'm better. I think I'm better in the stand-up. I think I've got better wrestling, and I think I've got better ground. So, but that X factor remains, and yeah, you need to have the luck a little bit on your side too. I do believe that you can force the luck with a lot of hard work. So yeah, we just need to pick ourselves up, get back at it, and that's exactly what we've been doing. So I'm actually looking forward to getting in there again and close the year with a win.
Yeah, absolutely. Alistair, it really seems like you and Stefan get along well, and you have a lot of mutual respect for each other going into this fight. Obviously Stefan has had some issues with anxiety. He had some heart issues as well. Tell us, what are your thoughts of Stefan as a fighter, and what's your relationship like with him?
Well, we met a couple of times, but we don't really have a relationship. We're co-workers with each other. He's also from Holland. There's mutual respect. But other than that, there's nothing there.
I was going to say, and you probably are aware of this, but when Stefan was on the MMA Hour, he mentioned that he did not think you were overrated. However, he wasn't too impressed by your record before the UFC. How do you feel about him saying that?
I'm not gonna, I don't care about this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Now, recently, the big title match that we spoke about with you last time when you were on the show, Fabricio Werdum versus Cain Velasquez. Cain got injured, and now Marquardt is stepping up at the last second to verse Fabricio for the interim title. What did you think when you heard the news, and who are you leaning towards in this matchup, Alistair?
At the heavyweight division, it can go either way. Hunt is an exceptional fighter. Fabricio has been showing great skill in his last several fights. It can go either way. That being said, I give Fabricio a slight advantage. But Hunt is no easy guy. I fought him back in 2008. He's the strongest guy I ever fought. If you get hit, you got a problem. So it's going to be an exciting matchup, and I'm actually excited for that fight in a couple of weeks.
Well, New Zealand's like a neighbor to Australia, so you can imagine how excited we are as well. Obviously, you've mentioned a couple.
Isn't he New Zealand actually?
Well, yeah, he's from New Zealand, but he lives in Australia, in Sydney.
Okay, just checking.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of times on our show that the title is still your goal, and obviously, anyone in the UFC, that's what they're after. At the moment, what do you think the journey to the belt looks like for you? How many fights do you think before you be fighting for the title?
I'm not even thinking about all that stuff. You can think about it, debate that stuff. That's your job. I'm focusing on the next fight. And even besides that, I don't like to talk too much. Yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. You guys can talk about it, and I'm just going to perform. December 13th, tune in, UFC Phoenix.
Absolutely, and we do enjoy talking about all that stuff. Now, Alistair, we have some fan questions here for you. The fans knew you were coming on the show, and they've sent in some questions. I have a question here from @Mistakeovo. He'd like to know, Alistair, most of your wins are by a guillotine. He'd like to know, why haven't you used the technique as much lately, and would you use it if you saw more opportunities to use it in the future?
Fan questions, I love them. Okay, so why don't I use the guillotine more? Because a fight is like a dance. It takes two to tango. A lot of opponents, they train defense on the guillotine and they make sure they don't get in that position in the first place, so then there's no guillotine. But rest assured, I'm training it, and when the opportunity presents itself, you'll see it back. Can be sooner, can be later, but you'll see it back.
Okay. Now, Fierce Red Belt has an interesting question, and this is looking to the future. I know you're the type of guy that you focus on the thing that's in front of you, but what are your plans after your MMA, kickboxing, professional combat sports? Would you be a gym owner or anything like that?
That is a great question. What will I do? Well, I'm 34 years old now, and that question does resonate more and more. I am thinking about what I will do. I'm not sure yet. I cannot answer that question yet, but I'm not sure if I will own a gym. I probably will start to teach. Maybe I will own a gym because that could be it. I like to teach though. I like to do the seminars. I can teach good one-on-one, good group classes. So probably something like that because it also keeps you in shape. Yeah, and I couldn't answer beyond that. I am looking at some things, but I'm not going to discuss that here now on the show.
May I just make a quick suggestion? You love music festivals. Maybe you could be a DJ. You could travel the world and you could attend all the festivals that you want.
Well, I do like house music. I love house music, being from Holland and listening to the music for 18 years now, and I've always used house as entrance songs. So, yeah, cool. Let's do it. You gonna book the flights for me and the clubs and everything?
Yeah, sure. I'll find some guy's credit card.
Now, Alex, so the next question comes from Hatsu Hayoki. He'd like to know, who's your favorite fighter of all time, both from K1 and MMA?
My favorite fighter?
Yep.
Well, I like, I have. There's so much now, so many different fighters who all hold their own. But definitely Fedor, of course. You have the greatsies before that. Sakuraba, I was a fan of him growing up. Anderson Silva's great. Jon Jones is great. There's so many great fighters. So, even Cain Velasquez, great fighter, tremendous heart. So I can enjoy many other fighters and also the lighter weights. What's his name again? Dillashaw, I believe it is, Dillashaw.
Yep.
TJ Dillashaw, super nice striking. So I can enjoy all different kinds of weight classes.
Awesome. Now, Alistair, we're going to finish off the interview with the tap-out round. It's a stock standard. We throw a bunch of fun questions at you, and basically you answer with the first thing that comes to your mind. But also, we just wanted to mention, there was another fan. He did not have a question, but his username is Reem Will Be Champ, and he wanted to let you know that he's your biggest fan. Now, tap-out round. Who's someone who you've been listening to on your iPod that you can't recommend, that you can recommend for us to check out?
You mean house music?
Just in general. We would assume house music, but just in general.
Me, myself, you're talking podcasts or songs?
Oh, songs.
Like there's like so much out there nowadays. Okay, well, I love, what's his name again? I can't get his name. Well, of course, Afrojack, buddy of mine, Tiesto.
Yep.
Sidney Townsend, which always get me going is Sonny Marciano and oh man, I can't get the name. Sonny James and Ryan Marciano.
We feel like we put you on the spot. Suffice to say, if anyone's ever watching an episode of The Ream, whip out Shazam and pretty much check out all those songs and get those, because a lot of the songs that you use in The Ream are really good.
Yeah, but I don't. They're not really commercial though. They're a little bit undercover.
No, that's what's good about them.
We like the sneaky undercover stuff. Now, speaking of music festivals, what's the greatest music act that you've ever seen live?
I would say Ultra in Miami, Ultra Festival.
Where was that, in Miami?
Yes, Miami downtown.
Okay. Now, Alistair, give us the lowdown on the Octagon in Connecticut. It looked pretty small, especially when you and Ben Rothwell fought. Did you feel like the Octagon was small that night?
Well, it was. It was, to my surprise. It was a little bit different than I was used to. But yeah, again, it doesn't matter, because as a fighter, you need to adapt quick.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to fight in small environments, big environments. So there's no excuse there.
Now, the next tap-out question is from a fan called Brendan S. He'd like to know, what's the best place to live and retire on this planet?
I would say Miami.
Now,
or Thailand. That's our rules.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we asked you about dancing earlier. Do we think we'll ever see Alistair Overeem on Dancing with the Stars in the future? And if you did end up on the show, what's the dance you think you'd be known for?
No, I'm not going to do that kind of stuff.
We've got another fan question in the tap out round here. Like it is, would like to know. He says, I've been trying out horse meat as an alternative to steak, but can't find the right seasoning. He'd like to know if you have any tips.
Well, if you don't like to eat it, then don't eat it.
No, he's saying he can't find the right seasoning. Like, do you have any seasoning tips for it?
Just black pepper and salt.
And finally, Alistair, how are you planning on finishing or beating Stefan Struve come December 13th on UFC on Fox 13?
Well, of course, knockout in the first round, but again, it takes two to tango. But I do have a very good feeling about this fight. Yeah, I do think this is going to be positive.
Excellent. Well, we can't wait. I'm sure a lot of people are getting excited already just hearing you say the word knockout and picturing it on December 13th. Guys, UFC on Fox, December 13th. If you're here in Australia in the future, it is December 14th. And you can follow Alistair on Twitter at Alistair Overeem. Alistair, it's always been a pleasure. Oh, and of course, his website, AlistairOvereem.com. Alistair, thank you so much for stopping by the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Yo.
There we go, Alistair Overeem, and it's going to be an exciting fight cast over there at UFC on Fox 13. I'm excited to see how it goes. And yeah, Alistair Overeem, he's had some issues with some fights previously, but there's no denying it. The guy is a very interesting person to watch, and he's still a star. He's still someone that captivates people when he comes out and fights, and always brings up a lot of discussion and interest in MMA when he does fight. So always exciting to see him fight, and exciting to see how he does against a guy like Struve.
Yeah, absolutely. In all honesty, I think he will be very prepared. If you look at the way, I mean, we'll save this for another time, but essentially Struve, with his long reach, but he has had quite a few issues recently. Meanwhile, Overeem, despite his recent loss, he will be coming in as the much, much fresher guy. We may see some ring rust with Stefan Struve, and I think if you look at Overeem's camp, if you look at the way they turn guys around, look at Andrei Arlovski. A couple of years ago, you would have thought that guy's career was absolutely dead. And we spoke to Greg Jackson a few years ago. It was UFC 127, BJ Penn and John Fitch, and we said, what's the deal with Arlovski? And Greg Jackson's like, I'm not ready to give up on Arlovski, and he was cool, calm, and relaxed as ever that they were going to turn Andrei Arlovski around. And look at him now in the UFC. So it's one of those things. You look at Mark Hunt, similar story, and now he's fighting for a UFC title. So it's not all over for Overeem, and I think he's going to have a very, very, very good chance against Stefan Struve. I'm confident he takes the win, but let's talk about the upcoming card. It's going to be in Sydney, Australia. We are officially less than a week away. It's UFC Fight Night 55. It's a very big card. It's going to be an awesome one. And we're going to do a bit of a breakdown. Actually, we're going to do predictions for the entire card, starting from the prelims all the way to the main event with Michael Bisping versus Luke Rockhold. So just to kick it off, the curtain jerker, bantamweight division. You got Marcus Brimage versus... I really hope I pronounce his name right. You've got the Chinese man. They call him the Leopard. Jamabek Turjan. I think I did a pretty good job there. How do you see this fight, Dennis, going? What do you think of Marcus Brimage? And do you think his scouter will get him in this fight?
Man, Marcus Brimage, even though he's had a rough run in the UFC, I still feel like this guy's a star. There's just something about him. People love watching him. In The Ultimate Fighter, he had one of the more interesting personalities. He loves the Dragon Ball Z. He's an exciting fighter. But yeah, he's had some tough fights. Obviously, he lost to Conor McGregor, who's one of the, main guys hanging around. Had another loss against Russell Doan. So, he's just had a bit of a rough run. I still think he's got a bunch of great skills. Just recently, a video came out of how he used to live a couple of years ago. And, a lot of people watched that video this week, and a lot of them are a little bit taken back to see the life of a sort of MMA prelim fighter. Even though you're fighting in the big leagues of the UFC, life is still not that easy. It's still not as glamorous as people think it is. But I still think that Marcus will come out and really show us what he can do in this fight. Still an opportunity to turn things around. I have Marcus in this one, Cass. I think he's going to come in and he's going to go back on a winning streak in Sydney. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely do. Well, I mean, he's going to start a new streak. He's basically coming off 2 losses, but so is Turjan. Turjan recently lost at the Ultimate Fighter finale, season 19, and at UFC Fight Night, Kim vs. Hathaway. So both guys coming off losses. To be honest, it's do or die for Marcus Brimage. I think he will put it all together. I still think he is the better fighter, even though he has less experience. And I think this is a tough one because even though they are basically the starting fight, whoever loses this one most likely will not have a job in the UFC. I still think Marcus is the better rounded fighter, and I still think that he has fought better guys, even though he's had less fights in his career. I'm definitely picking Marcus Brimage in this one. Looking forward to the middleweight fight next against Luke Zachrich versus Dan Kelly, Melbourne's own Dan Kelly. Just a few fun facts. Both guys have been fighting since 2006. However, Dan Kelly, he's obviously an Olympic judoka. He put his MMA career on hold for 6.5 years because he was busy with his judo schedule. Dan's undefeated in 7 fights, and all of Dan's fights took place in Australia. Now, he recently had a fight, obviously, on Ultimate Fighter Nations Australia versus Canada, and he lost to Sheldon Westcott via arm triangle. Sheldon, of course, was the eventual runner-up. Now, Luke, on the other hand, is also a product of the Ultimate Fighter. He was on Team Forrest on Ultimate Fighter 7, Forrest Griffin against Rampage Jackson, and he was the last pick. He's bounced around in other smaller organizations, but they're both exciting guys. They both like submissions. Only 3 of Luke's 17 fights have gone to decision. I would say that Luke has more experience over better opponents. Luke's got very good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He competed on a lot of BJJ comps and did the whole circuit, and both guys prefer to win via submission. I still have Dan Kelly in this one. I think he was a little bit unlucky in the Ultimate Fighter house. Again, another guy, I think he's going to put it all together, and I think this is going to be an exciting fight. What do you think, Dennis?
You know, Dan Kelly is one of those guys that you see, and everybody knows a guy like this in the gym. You know, they've been in the sport for so long, but their body is so beat up. And Australia versus Canada in the Ultimate Fighter, Dan was just so beat up in that season. You could tell in training he could barely do anything. He had issues with his knees, and the guy just came through as such a champion. And now at 37 years old, he's a little bit older, and his body, you know, is probably at the level of a guy who's about 50 from all the judo. But I absolutely agree with you. You know, both guys like the submission win, and I got to go with Dan in this one. I think he's in great shape. I don't think he's got as many injuries going into this one, and having the Australian crowd behind him, not having to really fly around too much, having the fight just an hour and a half away in Sydney, I think it'll give him the edge. I think that Dan's going to walk away in this one, and you know, it will be a great moment for him if he does. However, I won't be surprised if, you know, Luke takes advantage of the fact that he's a lot younger at 33 years old, and, you know, his body just hasn't been through the ringer like Dan's. So I think it all just depends on if Dan can get his game going, use his judo, because if Luke uses his athleticism against Dan, I think he may be able to notch out a win. Dan seems to struggle a little bit when he versus guys who are a little bit more athletic with less injuries and sort of younger and quicker, because his body just can't keep up with those kind of guys. It's just been through too much. So I'm hoping that, you know, this one will be an interesting one. 2 guys with submissions, 2 guys, you know, really wanting to make a statement here. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a crazy one. And the Australians are going to love Dan. You know, there's been so much positive publicity about Dan since the Ultimate Fighter. He's got so much respect here in the country. He's going to get an amazing ovation when he comes out to the octagon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, sometimes when you have 2 good grapplers, they do cancel each other out. It wouldn't surprise me at all if this one took place a lot on the feet. I think if it does, Luke will have the advantage. However, I am hoping and predicting that Dan Kelly will put it together and defeat Luke Zachariah, and he will take on the ground. Now, moving up next, speaking of Aussies, you've got Richie Vass against Louis Smolka. This is going to be a really tough outing for Louis. He's coming in on short notice, and to be honest, Richie looked really good in his last fight against Roland Sangachan at UFC New Zealand. So I'm definitely picking Richie in this one. I think he's another guy who's been training really hard. A lot of times, you know, Aussies, they come into the UFC and, you know, we don't have anything like that here in Australia. Of course, we do have small organizations, but in terms of production value and just the sheer bright lights, for lack of a better term, you know, it's a big deal. And I think a guy like Richie, he did look really good in his last fight, and I think, again, he's putting it all together. I think he's been training really hard for this one. And again, a guy like Louis, you know, he does get hit quite a bit, and I think Richie's by far the better rounded fighter. What do you think, Dennis?
Well, you know, I had a chance to catch up with Richie when we were in Sydney last, and you guys can check out the interview on our YouTube channel. And, you know, we had a chat about training here in Australia. Richie feels like training here is great, but, you know, there's a little bit of a gap when it comes to wrestling. So I believe he did do a bit of traveling around. I believe he did go overseas for a bit there and do some training for this one. Richie is just an amazing athlete. He's a big wave surfer. People may know him from the show The Crew from Fuel TV. He's just an amazing athlete. And I don't think, you know, he gets very intimidated because, I mean, he's in these crazy situations where he's taking on these waves that could possibly kill him. And, you know, he's just a guy that loves the thrill and the adrenaline. And I think you're right, Cass. I think he's going to have the edge in this one. I think that Louis is just coming in a little bit late. But you got to give it to him. I think he's got a pretty cool nickname, Louis does. The Last Samurai, that's a pretty classy way to put it. And it'll be a very interesting one indeed. I think Richie will walk away with the win there. And also, of course, the home advantage for Richie, fighting in front of his crowd, in front of his family and friends. I think they'll push him across the line as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to the welterweight division, you got Vic Grujic versus Chris Clements. Fun fact, Vic Grujic actually lives in the same suburb as me. Carrum Downs represent.
People are going to stalk you down now. They'll be like, is this where this guy from Submission Radio lives?
Yeah, well.
Flying from America.
as opposed to Vic Grujic. Some facts about Vic, he's lost 3 times in his career and recently lost to Nordine Taleb. However, he is coming off of a win against fellow Aussie Chris Indich at the last UFC New Zealand card. By comparison, Clements is coming off 2 losses, one to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and one to Matt Riddle. It was, in the end, overturned, but it's nonetheless a loss. And the other thing is Chris Clements is coming off a huge layoff. He last fought at UFC 165. For anyone who's at home not counting, that's Jones versus Gustafsson. So that was 2003, I think August or September. It was a long time ago. I've got Vic Grujic in this one. Again, he looked good at UFC New Zealand, and I think he's going to beat Chris Clements. I think the layoff's going to be too much for Chris. Even though he's had more fights, even though he does have strong stand-up, I just think a loss to Matt Riddle, it doesn't bode well, and I think Vic's going to beat him. What do you think, Dennis?
Vic is one of those guys that was on the season that you really felt for. He had a family. He was a bit older. He was a tradie, and he put his whole career on hold to go over there and really take a big risk to try and make it one last play at his career. It was just heartwarming to see how well he did, how much work he put into his fighting and training, and how passionate he is about the sport. And, how at an older age, he's really making a run for it. Training over at Alliance MMA with a lot of really great guys when he's over in America, I think also helps Vic a lot. Obviously, like you mentioned, he's got a great name here in Australia. But unfortunately, with this one, I've got Chris going over him. I just think he's got experience against better fighters, even though he did lose against Stephen Thompson and Matt Riddle. I just don't think Vic's got the skill to beat Chris, really. I don't think he's versed anybody like Chris before. And even though, I'm rooting for the Aussies, I think Chris might walk out with this one. But I'll be really happy to see Vic win if he can pull it off.
It'll be an interesting fight to see nevertheless. Now, directly afterwards and also in the welterweight division, you've got Dylan Andrews versus Sam Alvey. Now, Dylan is coming off of a loss to Clint Hester, who is also fighting on the same card. We'll be talking about his fight later. He was losing that fight against Clint. However, it officially ended when Dylan's shoulder dislocated. It was actually pretty brutal. Both guys were very emotional about it. However, he did recently win against Jimmy Quinlan and Papia Betty. So I'd say Dylan Andrews does have the better experience. Sam Alvey, meanwhile, has lost his UFC debut against Tom Watson, a UFC Fight Night Beta versus St. Preux. I've got Dylan Andrews going over in this one. I mean, even in the Ultimate Fighter, he did really well until he ran into Uriah Hall, which, I mean, we all know that story. I still think Dylan Andrews has a lot. And in all honesty, Clint Hester, he's no joke. He's a really tough matchup for anyone. So I don't think there's any shame in losing to Clint. I think he's going to beat Sam Alvey, and I think he's going to do it quite easily. What do you think, Dennis?
Dylan Andrews is another guy with an amazing story. Born a Maori in New Zealand, growing up in a household with a lot of drugs. His family were involved with gangs, and he really stayed on that path to become an athlete. When he fought in the Ultimate Fighter, you could really tell that he has the heart. Even though some of his skills went as far along as the heart that he showed in those fights, you could just tell he's just one of those guys that really puts it all out there. In this fight, I'm going to give it to Dylan. However, I won't be surprised if Sam could win it. Even though Sam hasn't had a very good run in the UFC, the guy has quite a bit of experience with 23 wins and 6 losses, being associated with Team Quest. I think he's been around the ringer as well. So being a guy that's been around the ringer as well, hopefully he doesn't have a few sneaky veteran techniques that he pulls out on Dylan. But I think Dylan's going to come out all guns blazing. And the thing with Dylan is he's got some great power in his hands. He can really put on a great show and really, deliver that knockout. So it'll be very interesting to see. But I have Dylan going over this one by knockout.
I think the other thing about Team Quest is, and no doubt, they're a good camp. But if you look at the fighters that are coming out of there that are really top-notch fighters, there's been less and less slowly over the years. You look at, obviously, the Dan Hendersons, the Randy Coutures, the Chael Sonnens, the Matt Lindlands. Those guys are, pretty old school, and I think a lot of the new breed guys, they're not necessarily coming out from a camp like Team Quest. So honestly, even more reason why I think Dylan Andrews is going to come out on top. Moving on, next in the light heavyweight division, you've got fellow Aussie Anthony Perosh versus Carlos Guto Inocente Filo. I honestly think this is going to be a really tough fight for Anthony. Guto was, of course, the man injured by Alistair Overeem when Alistair was training with the Black Zillions, which led to Overeem allegedly being asked to leave. He's a kickboxer. He recently lost to Derek Lewis by KO in the first, and, of course, is coming down from heavyweight to light heavyweight, much like Anthony Perosh did in the past. Guto, he's got above average takedown defense, and he, of course, trains a lot with high-level partners, guys like Rashad Evans, Tyrone Spong, Michael Johnson, and a lot of other guys, Matt Mitrione, a lot of other guys at the Black Zillions. Now, Perosh's main weapons are on the ground. However, he does have knockout power. He can knock people out. Of course, you remember that, I think it was like 12-second knockout of Vinny Magalhaes. Perosh's striking doesn't lie at the top of the light heavyweight division, however. It can be stiff sometimes, and can be a little bit rudimental. And of course, like we said, Guto is a kickboxer. So I think this is going to be a really tough one for Perosh. I think Anthony is going to have to get it to the ground, and he can smother guys. He does have good top control. We saw him against, I'm trying to think of his name, Cyril Diabate, and I mean, Cyril was obviously a kickboxer, and Perosh beat him quite handily. I just think Carlos Filo is a different animal. He's much stronger, and like I said, the takedown defense is there for Carlos. So I think it's going to be a tough night for Anthony, and I see Carlos going over. What do you think, Dennis?
You know what, Cass? It will be a very tough night at the office for Anthony. You know, you pretty much said everything there is to say about this fight. I'm going to go with Anthony for this one because he's got the hometown advantage, not the hometown, but the home country advantage. And I just think he's a really, quite frankly, a tough son of a bitch. When Ryan Bader beat him up, you know, all those rounds, he really stayed in there, took all that damage. So, and even in 2010 when we saw Mirko Krokop put the beating on him, you know, when he stepped in last second, he's just a tough guy. I think he'll be in it to win it. He's going to come out. He's going to do his best. I think he might be able to grind this one out, use his submission and catch him. So I'm going to go with Anthony on this one. Something tells me he's going to win it. But look, I won't be surprised if it goes the other way because it is a very, very tough matchup. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, one thing's for sure. If Anthony does win, for those guys who may not know in the crowd, who may be casual fans who don't know how good Carlos Filo is, but for those that do, there will be a massive reaction if Anthony Perosh wins it. Obviously, the fellow Aussie. It's definitely going to be an interesting fight. Now, moving on, another fellow Aussie in the lightweight division, you've got Jake Matthews versus Wagner Roca. Jake, of course, fellow Aussie, he's undefeated and last won at UFC New Zealand, had a very impressive performance. Wagner, however, is coming back to the UFC after a 4-fight win streak in smaller organizations. However, in Wagner's first stint in the UFC, he lost to Donald Cerrone and was knocked out by Jonathan Brookins. Now, both guys preferred to win by submission, so it should be an exciting fight. However, I've definitely got Jake Matthews winning in this one. He's got a lot of momentum, and we did speak to Kyle Noak recently. You can check out that interview on the YouTube channel. It's an exclusive, and he did say that he's watched Jake train. He's become a lot better since The Ultimate Fighter, and he even said that if Jake went in there with the knowledge that he has now, he would have won the whole show, which is a very big thing to say. So I'm confident in what Kyle Noak says. I think Jake Matthews is definitely going over. He's on a massive 10. He'll be winning at UFC Fight Night 55. What do you think, Dennis?
I think that, you know, I made a big fuss about this after the season when Jake Matthews was on Team Australia. I was just outraged, man, that they didn't sign the kid straight away. They didn't sign him straight away. He had another fight locally here, I believe, in Melbourne before the UFC signed him. And when I watched the show, I saw Jake as the future for Australian MMA. I was really impressed by the way he held himself in the octagon on the show. He seemed so mature for his age, and you know, I was really shocked and surprised that they didn't sign him straight away. I suppose the UFC wanted to see him fight outside the UFC after the show just to see if he can hang in there. I absolutely agree with you. I think Jake is going to take this one, but this is going to be a situation when there's going to be a lot of pressure on Jake. He's fighting in his home country, and I think people are expecting a lot from him. There's been a lot of local media about him. You know, he's been on all the big websites here in Australia that the Americans may not have seen back in the US. There's a lot of people looking at him as the future of MMA in Australia, a future champion and I'm just hoping that pressure doesn't get to him. I have Jake winning this one, but if he doesn't win it, I could put it down to possibly nerves, possibly pressure, possibly having a lot riding on his shoulders. But we'll see how this one plays out.
And that's it for an exciting lineup so far of the prelim card. Up next, you've got the main card. And kicking off the main card, you've got Saul Palele versus Walt Harris. Now, I would say that Saul's got the advantage in this fight because obviously he's had a full training camp and Walt Harris is coming in last minute. Now, Walt, he tends to get hit and his striking isn't all that accurate. We saw both guys get out-wrestled very recently by Jared Rosholt. However, when we spoke to Soa in Sydney, again, you can check out that interview on the YouTube channel, he said that his wrestling was a big focus afterwards. He went to AKA and he worked a lot on his wrestling, and that he was really looking to improve that for the future, regardless of his next opponent. Soa also has a lot more experience in the octagon and he owns victories, while Harris will still be looking for his first win inside the UFC. He has been quoted recently, this is Harris now, as saying the third time's the charm. I don't think this will end well, however. I think this is going to be a close fight, to be perfectly honest. And I think Walt Harris does have the chance. I still think, though, Saul Palele will take him down. And if he doesn't grind him out, then I think he might win via TKO. The other difference is Soa has actually beaten Nikita Krylov in a very ugly fight. However, Harris did get knocked out by Nikita in 25 seconds. And going on the outside of the UFC to small organizations, Harris's recent win was over DJ Lindemann. And that doesn't say much because Lindemann is 2-6 in his last 8 fights. 2 of those losses to light heavyweights in Robert Drysdale and a horror movie knockout courtesy of Anthony Rumble Johnson. So my official prediction for this one is Saul Palele v TKO in the first or second. What do you think, Dennis?
You know, and it's an interesting one, like you said. You know, Soa looks like he's coming in great shape. Local journalist Nick Walshaw spoke to him last week, and Soa said he was at 120 kilograms already. So it looks like he's on target to make weight. He's training over there, like you said, at AKA Thailand. And when he spoke to us last time in Sydney, he just said due to all the heat, because in Thailand it's so hot, you know, it's just easier for him to lose weight. You're always sweating when you work out. You know, it's almost like you're in a sauna. So it really looks like he's had a good training camp leading into this one. He had a few fights back to back before in the UFC, and you know, maybe too many fights back to back, not enough of a training camp. Maybe that it was something that, you know, factored into his latest loss. I really see him winning this one. I think I agree with you, TKO first or second round, but I won't be surprised if he loses because, you know, Harris, he's got heavy hands, and in the heavyweight division, anything can happen. But,
yeah,
you know, even you and me, Cass, we saw Soa take a lot of punches in person when he fought local fights here in Melbourne. So he's got a pretty strong chin. A lot of people will be surprised to know he's 37 years old because, you know, he's pretty much hitting his peak right now. This is the prime of his career. You know, he's been looking really, really good. I think he'll continue that win streak. I mean, begin a new win streak and look great. And who knows, in the heavyweight division, you only need a few wins until you're in a chat for the title picture. And this could be a good start for Soa building his campaign towards a title. So very excited to see what happens in this one.
Absolutely. Now, moving on, we've got Robert Whittaker, another fellow Aussie, to no surprise, versus Clint Hester. Now, this is one of the, I'd say, probably 3 fights that I think could potentially be fight of the night, or more likely will be fight of the night. Now, both guys are great strikers. I really like this matchup. The UFC's done really well with this one, of course, Joe Silva. Clint Hester has his boxing background, and I believe the guy is more athletic than Robert Whittaker. I believe Clint has more accurate striking, and to be honest, he has much better striking defense. Robert Whittaker, he does have some very elusive defense. He prefers to sort of dodge punches and weave and have his hands down low, but sometimes it does cost him. He's obviously had a few recent knockouts, whereas Clint Hester is thus far undefeated in his MMA career. Now, Robert, however, has faced the stiffer competition. He lost both to Court McGee and Stephen Thompson, but one thing to consider, and this is when we were there at the UFC Fight Night 55 Sydney press conference, he did mention that his weight cut was causing him to not be able to hear. I've never even heard of that happening during a weight cut, so it just goes to show how much weight Robert was cutting, and the question here will be how much did that affect his performance or his previous performances. So we'll see how a middleweight Robert Whittaker translates to taking strikes, and to see if maybe he has extra cardio, if he's not as drained. And of course, the more gassed you are, the more likely you are to get knocked out. So we'll see. We might even see Robert Whittaker with a much more improved chin. He basically needs to make this an ugly fight and take it to the ground or against the cage. To be honest, though, my official prediction, due to being the better striker, I'm taking Clint Hester via knockout in the second. What do you think, Dennis?
Yeah, just further on with this weight cut, you and me, we hung out with Robert a little bit back when EA UFC was coming out in Sydney. And one of the things you and me came out of that interview saying is, this guy's actually pretty big for welterweight. Like, we were actually pretty surprised at how big he was. He doesn't translate as looking that big on TV, and obviously he's made the weight cut and all that, but he was actually pretty big. So I guess I could see some of the issues he'd be having with that weight cut. And, Nate Marquardt was on our show earlier and said how much the weight cut took out of him when he went down to welterweight, and he wasn't really the same fighter like he was in middleweight. So, perhaps we will see an improved Robert Whittaker, but I absolutely agree with you. I think Clint Hester is a future star. He's a really athletic kid. I don't think he's shown anybody what he can really do in the octagon just yet. It was a little bit overshadowed in the Ultimate Fighter when he was there. I see him knocking Robert Whittaker out. Robert's got a tendency to drop his hand a lot and not block his chin, because he's got an interesting style, a mix of karate, kickboxing, boxing. I think Clint Hester is a very slick guy, and he'll take any opening he can. If Rob keeps his hand down, there is an opening for Clint. He will land that punch and knock him out. I have Clint winning this one. Very interested to see what happens with Robert. If he does pull a win over Clint, though, it's a great start for him in the middleweight division.
Now, moving on in the lightweight division, here's another couple of guys that could potentially be fighting for the title in the division that has been described as a shark tank. Everybody here is a killer from probably number 1 to number 20, possibly even beyond. You've got Al Iaquinta versus Ross Pearson, and these two guys, they're not two guys that are really on anyone's radar, so to speak. People are talking about, your Gilbert Melendez, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Donald Cerrone, but these guys, whoever wins this one, I think, will very much be very close to title contention. Pearson obviously has the edge in striking, I think, slightly, just purely because he has versed better competition, and he's versed better strikers in guys like Cub Swanson, Dennis Seaver, Edson Barbosa, Melvin Gillard. He hasn't always had the best success, but he has been in there with the better strikers. Al Iaquinta, he has basically been described as the mini Chris Weidman. However, against Ryan Couture, Al went to a decision, whereas Ross TKO'd him in the second round. Here's the other thing, Al Iaquinta trains with a great camp, obviously Team Sarah Longo, and he trains with Chris Weidman. So that's something that will definitely sharpen you. However, Pearson is no slouch either. He's got an 80% takedown defense record. We saw George Soteropoulos absolutely struggle to take him down. And Ross Pearson trains, obviously, at Alliance. He trains with guys like Dominic Cruz, Miles Jury, and Phil Davis. And it's very good to see a guy from the UK coming into America to, train with guys that are obviously good wrestlers. Now, I believe the fight will mainly take place on the feet unless Al wants it on the ground. Al does tend to look amazing. However, he sometimes does make poor decisions, and I think has lapses in judgment in the octagon. My prediction, however, is Ross Pearson by decision. It really wouldn't surprise me if it goes either way. I mean, if Al Iaquinta comes out guns blazing and this is Al Iaquinta's coming out party, it really wouldn't surprise me. This is, of course, the year of the underdog, as has been described by, I believe, Kenny Florian. I would still officially predict, though, Smart Money says Ross Pearson by decision. What do you think, Dennis?
Well, this is a very interesting matchup. And Al Iaquinta, he was on our show a few weeks back, and how excited did he sound, Cass, when he found out this fight was going to happen? He just sounded ecstatic. He saw this as his big opportunity, like you mentioned, to really make a statement in the division. And the fact that the fight is happening so quickly was actually something that he preferred, not having to think about it, all that time. I think it just drained him mentally, overtraining as well. So I think he'll be coming into this one quite happy. On Twitter, he seems like he's really enjoying Sydney so far, and the whole experience of being up so high on the card, and being a focal point of the card, really. But I think I agree with you. I think Ross Pearson is going to take this one. I think if you look at Ross's record, you could almost make the case for the fact that he's actually, that Diego Sanchez fight, I think that most people think that Ross won that fight. He had that no contest, so he could almost be on a 3-fight winning streak there. So I think that Ross Pearson's going to take this one. I think that Al might actually take this to the ground. I think he might use his wrestling. I don't know if he wants to stand with Ross, and I think Ross is going to knock Al out in the second round.
Wow, bold prediction there.
Yeah.
We'll see if the trend continues. We've obviously got the main event here. You've got Luke Rockhold against Michael Bisping. This is I think one of the bigger fights this year. I think on a year for the UFC where there's been a lot of injuries, a lot of fallouts. I mean, just the following week, you've got obviously Cain Velasquez and Diego Sanchez, two of the biggest Mexicans in the UFC, out of UFC Mexico. It's absolutely ridiculous. I think a fight like Michael Bisping against Luke Rockhold, absolute blessing for the UFC. I think fans have really been creaming for a grudge match like this. And to think that it almost didn't happen, to think that it was almost going to be Machida versus Rockhold, I think we would have been absolutely robbed of an opportunity. Now, as far as stylistically, I have Rockhold going over in this one. Why? I think he's the younger guy. I think he's the more athletic guy. And I think his wins mean a lot more. Recently, he was on a show called Counterpunch. It was on UFC on Fox, hosted by John Anik. We saw a different side to Luke Rockhold, or more, I should say, probably the regular side of Luke Rockhold, the very calm, confident, calculating look of Luke Rockhold. I think some of the recent footage between Michael Bisping and Luke Rockhold, you see Luke Rockhold a little bit frazzled. Michael Bisping obviously taking advantage of his fantastic vocabulary and trash talk. In this case, we saw Luke Rockhold. He had a lot more comebacks, and he was basically just eyeing off Michael Bisping, and Michael Bisping looked a little bit more submissive than we've seen him recently, and he really got Bisping with quite a few good points. Now, one of the ones that I liked was, he said to Michael, "Who have you beaten that's still in the UFC?" And if you take a look at Michael Bisping's record, he owns a lot of wins, don't get me wrong, but a lot of those guys are no longer in the UFC. Guys like Matt Hamill, Elvis Sinozik, Jason Day, Chris Lieben, Dennis Kang, Dan Miller, Jorge Rivera, Jason Miller, Brian Stan's now retired, Alan Belcher is essentially in limbo. Now, the only guys that are still in the UFC for Michael Bisping that he's beaten are obviously Kung Lee, technically Alan Belcher, and Akiyama, who recently returned and is fighting in the welterweight division. So I would say, while he beat Kung Lee fair and square, he took a lot of body kicks. Luke Rockhold, obviously being a southpaw, will definitely want to take advantage of that, and he will want to go for that liver kick. Now, if you look at Luke Rockhold's record, granted it's about half or a third of the size of Michael Bisping's, however, his wins are over Jacare Souza, the ones that stand out in Strikeforce. Jacare Souza, who everyone's talking about how he should get a title shot. Tim Kennedy, who also beat Michael Bisping, and he beat Keith Jardine. Now, a win over Keith may not be as big as it was back in the day, but granted, it was a first-round knockout. He also had a body kick against Costa Philippou and a first-round submission over Tim Boetsch. Now, the question you got to ask yourself is, against Tim Boetsch, do you think Michael Bisping would have beaten him in the first round the way that he did? And against Costa Philippou, do you think Michael Bisping would have TKO'd him in the first round? Now, I know MMA math is not always accurate, and in fact, most times it isn't. Otherwise, you could find out that Kimbo is the linear UFC heavyweight champion. But I would say in this case, Luke Rockhold's going over. He's got too many tools. The kicks are going to slow down Michael Bisping. I wouldn't be surprised to see a knockout. I think he's going to, and he said to us in an interview that you can see on YouTube, he's going to go for body kicks, he's going to go for head kicks, he's going to go for low kicks. I think he's going to switch it up. I think he's got the better wrestling. He trains with better wrestling partners. I'm not hating on Michael Bisping one bit, but I just think this is a really tough matchup for Michael Bisping. Dennis, what do you think?
Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting matchup. And, when it first got announced and Luke Rockhold was on our show, I thought, Luke is just going to run through this guy. I thought he's just going to run through Bisping. Now, we had an opportunity to spend some time with Bisping in Sydney and Luke as well, and really kind of pick their brain and get to know the guys. And I have to say, one of the things I really respect about Michael is he's just a guy that will take on the toughest guys. He doesn't mind. And he's just so strong mentally. Michael knows that this is going to be a tough fight. He knows that Luke is going to be really, really, really tough, and he's not taking him lightly. So in this fight, I will pick Luke over him. I think Luke has the tools to beat him, and I'm not going to be surprised if he knocks him out in the first round due to kicks. But I'm also not going to be surprised if Michael Bisping uses his footwork, drags this out, and wins a decision over Luke Rockhold. Don't be surprised, people. Now, Luke is expecting to come in there and finish Michael Bisping. And I don't think he's underestimating Michael, but at the same time, I don't know if he's really looking at Michael as much of a challenge as he can be. Michael can be very sneaky. He can use that footwork. He's got great takedown defense. And the longer the fight goes into the later rounds, Michael can use his jibber jabber punching, his tap tap tap, his jab jab jab, 1-2 1-2, moving around. He can frustrate Luke. Luke might be too emotional going into this fight. It really seems like this trash talk is taken out of it, out of it, Luke, mentally. Sometimes when we hear Luke talk about it, in the press conference, it just sounded like Luke has had enough of the talking. He just wants the fight to happen already. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens. I got Luke winning this, but I'm not going to be surprised if Michael uses his sneaky veteran moves, his footwork, his pitter-patter punches to drag this one out and win a decision. I won't be surprised.
See, and you know what? You're absolutely right. Michael Bisping is someone that you never, ever bet against because he's been bet against so many times and he's beaten those guys and he's overcome the odds. And he's right in the sense that he said, you're just like all the other guys that said they were going to knock me out. In this case, I'm not so sure that Luke will knock him out, but I think Luke will beat him. But you're absolutely right, Dennis. Michael Bisping is a veteran and he's frustrated many, many, many guys. And that's the funny thing about him. He's fought mostly guys with knockout power throughout his whole career. Chris Lieben, Jorge Rivera, Brian Stan. Sometimes it goes his way, sometimes it doesn't. Kung Lee. I just think that in recent interviews I've read with Luke Rockhold, he's talked about how in the Vitor Belfort fight, he was too emotional. He came in, he got angry, he wanted to smash him. And since then, he's learned from that to just be a lot more calm, collected, and be like a sniper. I honestly don't think that the trash talk's going to affect him much. I can't wait for the weigh-in. That's going to be awesome. If you're in Sydney, absolutely get down to All Phones Arena. I believe it's going to be on Friday, the day before. It's going to be absolutely awesome, but I really do think Luke Rockhold will beat him. And up until now, Michael Bisping has obviously said that all of his knockouts have been to prior TRT users. I think Luke Rockhold will be the first guy to beat him fair square. And I mean, Tim Kennedy did it, but I think Luke Rockhold's going to knock him out. So my official prediction for this one will be Luke Rockhold wins in the first round. Bold prediction at that.
Yeah, and I'm just looking through Luke's record right now, and like you said, Cass, he's been some giants, been some really great fighters, but and just none of them are trash talkers like really like Michael Bisping. And like he said, the weigh-in's going to be a very important time because this is where Michael Bisping is going to use his trash talk skills. He's going to use all of the skills that he has to really piss Luke off. Everybody needs to expect this. When they have that face-off, don't be surprised if Michael Bisping pulls anything he has left out of his hat to really get Luke frazzled and really get his mind off the fight and more get him angry, because this is what Michael Bisping does best. The other thing people need to factor in is the fact that Michael Bisping has fought in Australia a lot of times. One of those times was against Wanderlei Silva, where he lost. Wanderlei looked great in that fight. It was a very good fight. The other one was against
Jorge Rivera.
That's right, Jorge Rivera. That's the big incident, obviously, where he spat on him. There was a lot of hatred there. There was that illegal knee in the fight. But, Michael Bisping, I think he's very used to fighting in Australia now. He's very good with his trash talking. I'm very interested to see what's going to happen with this. I'm very interested to see how he's going to use it in the days leading up to the fight, and if he's really going to try and get Luke frazzled in this one. It's just going to be very, very interesting to see what happens. Michael Bisping, what people don't realize about Michael Bisping is he's a very, very articulate guy. He's very smart, very knowledgeable. He's very educated. A lot of people see him as just a guy that talks a lot of trash, but he's very, very smart. And he uses his trash talk in a very smart way. And one of the things me and Casper really walked away from being around him, in the build-up to the Sydney event, and, we're going to be around him leading up to the event in the next few days, is the fact that he's just such a smart guy. And, we knew he was a great trash talker, but I think he's a very strategic trash talker. I'm going to be very interested to see what happens at the weigh-ins. And I'm going to be looking very closely at how Luke takes it, what his reactions are. Is he just going to brush it off his shoulder, or is he going to give a reaction to him? It's going to be very, very interesting to see. Like you said, Cass, he said he's not going to take his emotion into the ring after, it affected him in that fight. And, it'll be interesting to see how much he can really control it when, this fight happens. The other thing, of course, to consider is this fight's been building up for such a long time. Finally, they're going to be standing up across from each other, looking across each other in the octagon, looking at each other's eyes. Luke Rockhold's wanted this fight for such a long time. Will the nerves get to him? Will all the trash talk get to him? All the build-up, everything. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
Well, you make a good point, because Michael Bisping has been in this position for many a time, and he's usually the agitator. He's usually the one talking the trash talk, and I don't think I've ever seen him being the guy that's intimidated. We'll see how Luke Rockhold reacts to that. And you're right, he's never faced a guy that, talks a lot of shit, talks a lot of trash talk. it's going to be interesting to see. And the thing is, we're going to be there. We're going to be covering the event. We will be covering the weigh-ins, the Q&A. What else? Pretty much everything. We'll be doing interviews there as well. If there's a media scrum, we'll be on it. So if you haven't subscribed, definitely subscribe. We'll be having a lot of content and a lot of coverage. There's even a special event while we're down there in Sydney, so it's going to be a lot of fun. I think that's about it for this show. Predictions are in the bag. Want to thank all our guests for coming on this week. We've obviously got Nate Marquardt, Alistair Overeem, and Ricardo Lamas. Big thanks to those guys for coming on, especially Ricardo, because he's so close to his fight at the moment. That's another episode for this week. Next week, there won't officially be an episode because we'll be covering the event, so we unfortunately won't get a chance to do a full episode and have other interviews with people other than at UFC Sydney, but there will be a lot of content on the channel, so by all means, subscribe. Dennis, any last messages for the fans?
Well, the last message is, guys, go on Twitter, @SubmissionAUS, follow us. We will be live tweeting as everything happens, the press conference, the weigh-ins, the fights, anything that pops up in Sydney during the event, you're going to find out about it from us. If we're around, we'll let you know. And we love to interact with the guys. We get a lot of questions about what's going on in Sydney. What do you guys think about fights? We respond straight away. So if you have any questions about what's going on in Sydney, or if you want to get an insight that you don't usually get, because we'll be right there. We'll be tweeting photos, information, anything that we stumble across. So submission AUS is the Twitter tag there. And, check out the channel, Cass. We have the great interview with Carl Noak where we find out what he really knows about his Jackson teammates, Alistair Overeem, Tim Kennedy, Jon Jones. And also, we have a special little simulation up on YouTube as well, don't we, Cass?
Yeah, absolutely. We basically did the keys to victory to Michael Bisping versus Luke Rockhold. If you want to hear us talking about it, that's all well and good. But on the YouTube channel, we've basically simulated with EA Sports UFC. So you can take a look at how we think the fight will go down, what each guy has to do, and you've got a bit more visual. Like we said, guys, we'll be back in a couple of weeks. We've already got some guests that we are lining up. Can't really say who they are, but suffice to say you will love them. We'll be back on the weekend of the 9th of November. We hope to see you all there at UFC Fight Night 55 Sydney, and we'll be definitely posting about it. Peace out.